Our scripture this morning is taken from Mark chapter 6. And we'll read from 1 to verse 6a. Jesus left that place and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. On the Sabbath he began to teach in the synagogue, and many were astounded that heard him. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done by his hands? Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Jose and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Then Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor except in their hometown and among their own kin and in their own house." And he could do no deed of power there except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. Well,
thanks for that reading, Hugo. Just got to make sure the camera's getting my good side, I guess. All right. So we're back to Mark. We're following Jesus, even geographically. We're following him. In the previous chapter, he was on a boat, and they went first to a Gentile village, and then to a Jewish village, and now they are among Jews again, but even more intimately. And we can see where Jesus has come from. He's doing miracles, he's teaching, he's healing, and then he comes home, and the miracles stop. It's an interesting way that this is presented to us. And as I look around the room, for most of us, this is not our hometown. And even for those of you who this is your hometown, a lot of the people that you grew up with left. And home feels different every time somebody moves away. And when I talk to some of you about your travels, not everybody goes to their hometown with anticipation and excitement. And some of you go with anticipation, but that lasts for a few days, and you come back with a little bit of dread for the next time you have to go to the hometown. A little while ago, I was following on my Facebook feed, as we often do, a community Facebook page about my hometown high school. The high school that I studied at. And the school board in that area is redrawing the boundaries. So a lot of kids who grew up and live in the town where the high school is are going to have to go somewhere else because the high school is full. And you could probably guess the kinds of comments that popped up. There were protective mothers who were complaining that their kids couldn't go to the close school where their friends went, where they could, where the mothers could drop them off easily. There were comments from historical purists and nostalgic-minded people who talked about their fond memories of that high school. There were comments from people who were complaining about the extra costs of busing and why was tax money being used so recklessly. On and on and on it went. And then, as I read these, a lot of that resonated with me, right? My kids will be in high school soon. I pay taxes. I remembered that high school fondly. Why were they doing this? And then there was one voice that came to the discussion a little bit later, and she said, I'm a student at that school, and the school is full, and the building is old, and a lot of the classrooms smell funny. Nobody wants to be there. And then I remembered, yeah, some of those classrooms smelled funny 25 years ago. And then all of a sudden the nostalgia of sitting in the cafeteria with my friends and just the social part of it, that nostalgia faded away, and I remembered, oh yeah, I didn't like those hallways either. Yeah, tear the whole thing down. All of a sudden my mindset could shift because I resonated with her voice. But we have those core memories from a place, and we like to reconstruct those places in our minds. But we do so artificially sometimes. We all know you can't go back home again. It's never the same place. It's never the same people. It's never the same mindset. And sometimes it's because even in the moment we weren't fully living into what was there. And we go back and it's different. Those relationships are complicated, especially when we add time. Now, Jesus is going back to his hometown, and some time has passed. We don't really know, but it seems like a lot of things have happened. Life-defining moments have happened to Jesus outside of his hometown. Away from all of the people that knew him as a child. Away from all of the people who knew his extended family. And they are holding on to those memories of the past, just like our families do, just like what happens when we go back to our hometown. They were holding on to those memories of the past, and they weren't quite ready for the real Jesus, the present tense Jesus. They were looking for past tense Jesus, and they weren't ready for him. When we read the stories of Jesus, those powerful things that happened, they happened in Capernaum, they happened in other cities around the Sea of Galilee, but they didn't happen in Nazareth. But also, the angry crowds weren't in Nazareth right away. So when Jesus speaks there, he sort of has a neutral audience in the sense that they're not incredibly positive or incredibly negative. But they remember him differently. So they're not ready to celebrate him as the Messiah, but they're also not writing him off as a heretic, but they have him in a pretty small box. And there are parts of Jesus' life that I think help us to inform that process. So this passage here, we hear the crowd say, well, isn't this the son of Mary? Aren't his brothers so-and-so? Aren't his sisters still here? We can take from this, it's pretty clear evidence that they're saying, isn't this Mary's son? That Joseph has probably died. And Joseph probably died a long time ago. So then Jesus, as the oldest son in the family, he would have had to stay home. He would have had to work. He would have had to provide an income for his mother and his younger siblings until they grew up and got married and did all the things of independence. So, we understand from tradition and the stories that Jesus started his ministry when he was 30 years old. This is probably why. Because he's at home, he's working, he's waiting for his younger siblings to grow up. When they're independent, now Jesus can do his own thing. Now, and we know that Jesus' father, Joseph, was a carpenter, and then almost certainly Jesus would have picked up that family business. That Jesus would have continued Joseph's work, he would have learned Joseph's skills, and then he would have used Joseph's professional contacts. Everybody would have known Jesus as the carpenter. And one of the commentaries I read this week said that carpenter was kind of a catch-all term, right? Jesus wasn't going into people's homes and building fancy cabinets. Jesus was just building regular things. He was kind of a handyman. And I'm on the condo board where I live in Okotoks, and we have a handyman on staff, and we call him up, and we say, hey, there's something with these people's eaves troughs, can you fix it? No problem. We call him up, there's a fountain that needs something with the plumbing, can you fix that? No problem. He's not a trained plumber, he's not trained in any of these specific things, he's a general handyman. And there's an interesting phenomenon that happens with a handyman, and I think this is a metaphor for a lot of things. When the handyman comes to do a job, you can really only see his skill as depending on the job that you give them. If you ask the handyman to muck out your eaves troughs, you're not going to see the nuance and skill that he has in other areas. When you give a handyman a job and it gets done, you can only be impressed depending on how big that job was. And we're seeing this with Jesus too, that Jesus probably was a handyman. They would come and get him to fix a hinge or to repair a gate or something. And if it's a simple job, then you look at this person and you're like, well, why are we paying them like a professional? It's a simple job. And then when they do a bigger job, you say, well, yeah, that's his job. We paid him for it. But our ability to be impressed depends on the space that we give the handyman to impress us. And the people of Nazareth are not giving Jesus space to impress them. There's an interesting thing. I read a while ago that CAA, I don't know why they did this research, but they did a survey of employers because every now and then a big national company wants to relocate employees. And they did a survey to see, okay, well, what's the hardest city to convince your employees to move to? And on the flip side too, if you have employees in a particular city, which is the hardest city to get employees to move out of? And they were surprised that the same city was number one on both surveys. Now, probably wouldn't surprise you if I told you the first city what the first city was. It was Winnipeg. It's hard to get people to move to Winnipeg. Some of you have been to Winnipeg. It's lovely. It's hard to get people to move there. But the people in Winnipeg are happy. It's hard to get people from Winnipeg to move elsewhere. There's kind of this identity that we have about the places where we live. Sometimes it's shaped by the struggles that we face together. And so the people of Nazareth weren't even of the level of sophistication and good reputation as Winnipeg. Nazareth is a backwater, is kind of a fancy way to say it. Nazareth was the middle of nowhere, not known for sophistication, not known for good hygiene, not known for any of the good things. And Jesus is from Nazareth. So when Jesus would go elsewhere, then people would talk about him. Oh, this guy is from Nazareth. Who does he think he is? But then when he would go home, they would say, this guy's from Nazareth. Who does he think he is, right? He's one of us. Why does he think he's now somehow better than us? This is who we are. This is all that he can be. We're going to put him in this Nazareth box where we are and where he belongs. Another thing that happens in Jesus' speaking style that we see is Jesus speaks with authority is kind of a word that's used often for how he speaks. So with a Sermon on the Mount, which is in Matthew, similar thing in Luke, not here in Mark, but the crowd responds with amazement that Jesus speaks with authority, unlike the scribes and the priests and the Pharisees of their day. Jesus speaks with authority or expertise. So Jesus is speaking with his own thoughts. He's not just copying the patterns of the speakers of his day. And this is impressive for a lot of people, but it also challenges people. That they want Jesus sometimes to just stick to the script. And we get this way sometimes too. We're like, you got just extra things, just tell us the salvation story. Or, maybe just crap on Trudeau for a little while and we'll write the checks for you, right? This is kind of the way things work. That this is the script, tell us what we want to hear, and then we'll go on our days. This is what you're supposed to do. But Jesus doesn't stick to the script. So when Jesus comes to Nazareth, the audience are expecting a Nazareth sermon. They're expecting Jesus to stick to the Nazareth script, the texts that they were supposed to read. And Jesus reads different things. Jesus explains different things. And the crowd, they're impressed. They're like, well, he's got knowledge. We didn't teach him that. He didn't learn that here. He didn't learn that from the Nazareth teachers, because we know the Nazareth teacher. He's sitting right over there and he's shaking his head. He didn't learn that in Nazareth. So now we don't know if we can trust what he's learned in other places. And what's interesting, what stood out to me as interesting in this text, it says that the crowd was offended. That's what the NRSV says. That's what the NIV says. There are so many different translations that use the word offended. And this is a buzzword for us these days. Lots of people like to shake their heads at how easily people are offended these days. Well, Jesus experienced that too. But it's different in an important way. The story doesn't say that Jesus offended them. They were offended by Jesus. It might sound like a very subtle difference. But Jesus didn't go there and intentionally say things to bother them. And this is sometimes what happens to us right now, is that we have entertainers, we have news personalities, and I carefully don't use the word journalists there because I think journalism is above this, but we have people who tell us the news in a way that intentionally offends a certain audience, hoping that offended audience will kick up a fuss, and that fuss will generate more clicks on articles, which will sell more ads, which will sell more newspapers, etc. There's a lot of money in offending people. It's kind of a shortcut to getting an audience. But that's not what Jesus is doing here. It says they were offended by him. And other translations say something different. So the Message, which normally deviates quite a bit for our benefit, but the Message says they tripped over what little they knew about him and fell sprawling, and they never got any further. My Common English says they were repulsed by him and fell into sin. See, Jesus didn't stay in the box that they had made for him. Jesus had skills beyond what they hired him for. So go back to the carpenter handyman metaphor. So then the audience, rather than giving Jesus space to teach them or impress them or convict them, instead chose to be offended. They chose that rather than allow him to teach them. And all of us have the power to make that choice as well. Today is Mother's Day. And there's a section in our lives where mothers have a lot of room to impress us. Right? When you're about 12 years old and younger, you need everything. And the person who brings it to you is awesome. And you have all the room in the world for the people who bring you the things that you need. Then all of a sudden you get a little bit older, and you're not impressed anymore. You don't want that anymore. You want something new, you want something different, and the same old person is coming with the same old skills, and it's not worth anything anymore. And then all of a sudden you start doing that job for somebody else, and then you realize, oh, wait a second, I might have been taking this person for granted. And then all of a sudden that person isn't there anymore. Then you know you were taking it for granted. Our mothers can only impress us depending on the space that we give them in our lives and in our hearts. The people around us, just like, when we are, and maybe some of you are more mature than this, but when we go home to our hometowns, we are afraid of the old ways of thinking, that we will fall into the boxes that people have restricted us to. But we are not unique in that. All of us can't be unique in that. There are other people who feel the same way about going to our hometowns, because they think people like us will put them in little boxes. Jesus wasn't received as a prophet in his hometown. I might not be received as a pastor in my hometown. You might not be received as a professional, as an educator, as a person of significance in your hometown, because you've outgrown the box that people had for you. Or there are things to celebrate there. Your own development and maturity has outgrown what you thought one day you could do. But there's also a challenge there. It isn't just that you are outside of the box, but the process of putting people in boxes is the problem. So every time we feel the constraints of somebody else's box, should be a reminder to not place others in one either. The challenge in this story is a reminder of all of our hometowns and all of the people who limit and restrict us, that we shouldn't be restricting others. And Jesus, last of all, should be put in a box. Many of us do that to Jesus. We have a little role that we have for Jesus. I'm going to work the way that I want to. I'm going to pay taxes the way that I want to. I'm going to run my business the way that I want to. I'm going to parent the way that I want to. But on Sunday mornings, I have a little box where Jesus gets to sit, and he makes me feel better about myself for those few hours. Jesus doesn't belong in that box. Jesus belongs in all of it. So let us make room for the other people in our hometown, the people all around us, our mothers, of course, and Jesus too. Let us take them out of their boxes and see what all they are capable of, and give Jesus room in all of it to fill us with love and hope and peace.